Hey, well, welcome back. Excited to be with you again today. And today we're going to talk about gaslighting. Specifically, what is gaslighting and how can you tell if gaslighting is happening in your relationship? So stay tuned. Okay, so gaslighting. Let's jump into this topic a little bit. And the reason this matters so much is because so many individuals are feeling like individuals in their world are gaslighting them. And sometimes I think that may not be the case. I want to make sure that as you watch this video, that you learn enough about gaslighting to understand and maybe discern a little bit when true gaslighting is happening, and maybe when you're running into a different issue, like a perception issue. And at the beginning of this video, I'll kind of refer you to a previous YouTube video that we did that's taking a look at the pie chart exercise. I'll post that right here, the pie chart exercise video that has you kind of taking a look at the role of perceptions in relationships and the way in which perceptions can kind of wreak havoc sometimes in a relationship, and sometimes can even create feelings and experiences like somebody's being gaslighted in the relationship. So we want to make sure we're understanding the difference between common miscommunication and perception differences and gaslighting. That's the goal of this video, so that you don't feel like everybody in your world is gaslighting you, and that you can kind of understand and discern a little bit when there's actually a different kind of miscommunication problem versus a gaslighting issue. So let's start then with a good definition for gaslighting. And here's one of the best I've come across. Gaslighting is a malicious form of manipulation where an individual, the gaslighter, intentionally misleads another person, the victim, for self-serving purposes by causing them to question their own judgments and reality. Okay? So there's some really important components in that definition that we want to take a look at that make an interaction gaslighting versus miscommunication and misperception, right? Miscommunication, misperception are very common in relationships. Gaslighting is a little less common, but it can be extremely destructive when it's happening. And we just want to make sure that we appropriately kind of assess when it might be happening so that you can respond accordingly. So to jump into this then, I want to outline 5 different attributes that are very common in a person and in relationships when gaslighting is happening, right? So we're going to go over these 5 concepts, and in this video today, I'm going to review the first 2 of those constructs, and then in the next video, I'll do a part 2 to this, and in the next video, I'll review the other 3 attributes that are very common in a relationship where gaslighting is occurring. So those 5 attributes are as follows: intentional, malicious, self-serving, lacking of empathy, and a general unhealthy relationship. Right? So let's jump into that first one, intentional. What do we mean by intentional? Now, the reason intentional is important as part of the definition of gaslighting is because it's the knowing part of a person that creates manipulation, right? So manipulation is an intentional kind of misleading of a person, trying to plant a false narrative for them for self-serving purposes, right? So intentional just means that a person knows what they're doing and they're trying to put one over on you, right? And there's some signs that somebody's intentionally misleading you or giving you a false narrative is sometimes the way that we say it in psychology. And here's the first one. They may seem pleased when you are confused or questioning yourself. See, the average loving relationship, when you're interacting with another person who cares about you and loves you, they want to resolve the issue. They're not necessarily happy when you're confused or when you're kind of second guessing yourself. And somebody who's being intentionally trying to manipulate you, that will be pleasing for them. They want, in other words, that's their desired outcome, is that you kind of get jumbled up in your head enough that you maybe just turn to their perspective and abandon your own. So that's one sign you might look for. Another sign you might look for is that they get you more than they admit. So this just means that in the interaction, you may kind of get a sense that they understand you better than they're showing, right? They may show confusion when you feel like you're explaining yourself really well, right? You might be talking about an experience that you have with them, how sometimes you feel like they're cold or distant or insensitive, and they might be looking at you with this puzzled look like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what you mean. I've never experienced that before. I always love you, right? And they might come from this kind of confused look where you're like, I feel like you get me more than you're letting on that you get me. And that's very common with somebody who's being intentionally manipulative, right? Is that they will understand what you're trying to say. They're just trying to get you to see it different, so they won't acknowledge it. They'll kind of pretend like you're up in the night, that you're out in left field, right? Like that they don't understand what you're saying to get you to second guess yourself. So that's another sign. A third sign is that they're calculated in most things. So intentional individuals will typically be thoughtful and calculated going into most interactions. And you might notice this in this relationship, that this person may be calculated before they go into a social event or calculated before they go in to have a conversation with their boss. And thinking things through ahead of time isn't necessarily a bad sign, right? Most of us should go into situations like that prepared, right? Having thought ahead of time of some of the things we want to accomplish. But calculated can sometimes be a sign of manipulation, right? When an individual is sitting back and they're looking at the scenario and they're saying, how can I get what I want out of this scenario? And how do I need to show up? What are the words I need to say? How do I need to present to get what I want out of this situation? Somebody who's calculated that way, seems calculated in most of their interactions, is more likely to engage in gaslighting behavior in a relationship. So that's one thing to kind of take a look at under this intentional category. Another one is that they're often two-faced in other relationships. And this is similarly connected to that calculated idea that you'll notice as they interact with other people that sometimes they'll put on one face and one interaction when they're face to face with this person. And then after you leave the party or the event or the social interaction, they'll be driving home or something with you, and they'll kind of let on that they feel very differently about that person than what they showed that person to their face, right? And if your partner, if you're in a relationship with somebody like that who does that often, kind of that two-faced thing often in other relationships, it's a sign that increases the likelihood that maybe some of what you're experiencing with them in your relationship might be gaslighting as well. Another one, doesn't seem interested in mutual understanding. So mutual understanding in a relationship just means that two people are kind of honoring this idea that I want to get you and I hope you want to get me, right? And that as we get one another, we get closer together. That's this honoring of kind of mutual understanding. But individuals that gaslight in relationships, they're not so interested in mutual understanding. They're more interested in me understanding, you understanding me, right? So my understanding getting across to you, not trying to understand you, right? So a gaslighter is always interested in you getting them much more than they're interested in getting you in return. So that's another sign that you might be dealing with somebody who's gaslighting. And then finally, this lack of genuine emotion. So they use their emotion and your emotion to manipulate, and they can shift emotion rapidly. So using emotion in relationships is common in individuals who are knowingly and intentionally manipulating. Using emotion to manipulate is a really common way to do it, right? So I can increase my emotion either in sadness or in anger to try to play off of your pity, right? Or try to intimidate you. So in other words, if I increased my emotion toward tears and I just broke down in the relationship, I wasn't really feeling hurt or overwhelmed, but I wanted to show hurt and overwhelm to maybe get you to back off of your desires or your feelings in the relationship. Or I might use something like anger. I might build my emotion in the anger category to try to intimidate you or to cause you to want to de-escalate things by backing off of your stance, backing away from your perspective, right? So individuals who use emotion like that commonly in their interactions, it's a tendency that maybe you're dealing with somebody who's doing a little bit of gaslighting. So that's another way you can kind of look for this intentional attribute. So those are 6 different attributes of somebody who might be being intentional in the relationship. And just because somebody's using intentionality often doesn't necessarily mean that they're gaslighting you, but it increases the odds that this person's gaslighting you in the relationship if they're doing some of these characteristics of intentionality often in the relationship. So let's switch now. Let's switch to the second one, which is malicious. Right? And malicious starts to become a little bit more telling of a gaslighter because it's not just using kind of this calculated way of being, but it's being calculated or intentional with malicious intent, right? So it's knowing what I'm doing and choosing to do it anyway. And here are some of the signs of this malicious idea. The first one is that they'll use critical and demeaning language. So critical language just means that they're more likely to criticize you when they talk to you about issues or problems that they're having in the relationship. They're much more likely to talk about those issues or problems from a stance of criticizing you versus just giving you good feedback, right? So if they were talking to you about how the trash never gets taken out, a critical or demeaning way to talk about that would be to come and say, hey, you're so stinking lazy, right? All the time you leave the trash in the house. I don't think you do anything to contribute to anybody in any productive way. Oh my gosh, you're useless, right? So that'd be a really critical way to approach that. If I'm just approaching my spouse with good, healthy, honest feedback, it may sound more like, hey babe, we kind of talked about and agreed that you'd be responsible for the trash. I'm noticing it's not making it out real often. Can we talk about that? I'm not upset at you. I love you. I just really appreciate if this could get done a little bit more often, right? So that's just good, constructive, healthy feedback. So people who gaslight others typically will use critical and demeaning language. It's one of the ways that you can tell that there's this malicious intent in the interaction. And so keeping an eye out for that can be really helpful in knowing if there's the possibility that they might be gaslighting you. Another one under the malicious category, only sensitive to you when you begin questioning yourself or aligning with them, right? So you'll notice that they'll kind of be hard on you in the interactions when you maintain your stance, right? If you have a difference in opinion about how to spend money, for example, right? They might be hard on you about the ways in which you want to be conservative with the spending and use a lot of critical language, a lot of demeaning language, kind of putting you down, telling you that your ideas are stupid or dumb or don't make sense, that you're confusing, that you're up in the night, that you're crazy, right? They might come at you that way. And then if you start to soften and say, well, maybe it wouldn't hurt if we spent a little bit more money. Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. Oftentimes they'll become sensitive to you at that point, right? They'll want to reinforce or encourage that behavior. And so sometimes they'll be like, oh, thank you for getting me. I really appreciate that. I was so confused while you were saying this over here. And they might be a little bit nicer to you when you align with them, right? But there can often be this punishing when you're not aligned with them. So that can be a sign that maybe you're in a relationship with somebody who's gaslighting. Another one is they put little effort into understanding you better, even when you have patiently tried to understand them. So somebody who does gaslighting a lot in relationships, this kind of ties in the intentional one, they typically don't spend a lot of time trying to consider or understand others in their relationships, right? And most of us, most healthy individuals, will spend more time trying to understand their partner as they feel their partner trying to understand them. So if you're having the experience that you're putting a lot of effort into really trying to get your partner in humble, vulnerable ways, and they never really seem to return the favor, that could be an indication that there might be some gaslighting that happens in the relationship. So the fourth one, critical and demeaning of outside opinions. So somebody who's being manipulative typically wants to protect you from other opinions that might reinforce your thoughts, right? Because their goal is to get you to abandon your thoughts and to grab onto their own thoughts, right? And so they try to get you to second guess your thoughts, or to feel like that maybe you're crazy or that your judgment is off, in order that you'll adopt their thoughts, right? And so they start to get a little protective about other people having influence with you. especially if those people might align with you because their goal is to change your mind, right? Like not to promote your thoughts, right? They want you to abandon yours so that you'll adopt theirs. So this could be a sign that maybe somebody's doing some gaslighting in their relationship with you. And then finally, 2 more: threatens you emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually, or threatens people that you care about, right? So this threatening, kind of intimidating behavior starts to get really overt in an abusive way sometimes. Not all people who gaslight start to threaten in these ways, but certainly if this threatening behavior starts to happen, you can guarantee that you're in a relationship with somebody who's extremely unhealthy, and definitely could be some gaslighting happening as well, right? So any type of threatening behavior like that is not okay in a healthy relationship. Definitely doesn't have any place in a romantic relationship or a marriage. It's contrary to emotional safety. And certainly if some of that stuff's happening, you can probably count on there's some gaslighting happening in the interaction style. So these are the first 2, intentional and malicious. In the comments below, let us know your thoughts about that a little bit. If you've experienced either one of those in a relationship before with somebody that you feel like might be gaslighting, we'd love to hear about that. These are the first 2, as I mentioned earlier, common attributes of somebody who might be gaslighting in their relationship with you. And there's 3 more that I'll talk about in the part 2 video. So stay tuned for that, and we look forward to being with you again soon there. And in the meantime, please comment, subscribe, like, let us know a little bit if these attributes are helpful to you as you learn a little bit more about gaslighting and how gaslighting might be happening in your relationships. Thank you. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care.